He united a shattered nation of 600 million people and made it a power the world could not ignore. He also drove it into the deadliest famine in human history. This is Mao Zedong. To hundreds of millions, he was a living god, the great helmsman. To countless others, he was the architect of chaos and starvation. Few human beings have ever held such absolute power over so many lives. He was born in 1893 to a peasant family in the rice fields of Hunan province. China then was a humiliated giant, carved up by foreign empires and rotting under a dying dynasty. His father was a strict, hard-fisted farmer. Young Mao rebelled early, hungry for books and for change. As a young man, he drifted to the city, where new and dangerous ideas were spreading: nationalism and revolution. A handful of young radicals founded the Chinese Communist Party. Mao was among them. He came to believe that China's revolution would rise not from the cities, but from its vast ocean of peasants. But the nationalist leader Chiang Kai-shek turned on the communists, hunting them down and slaughtering them in the streets. The survivors fled into the countryside, where Mao began to build a peasant army and a war that would last decades. In 1934, surrounded and near destruction, the communists began the Long March, an epic 6,000-mile retreat across mountains and rivers. Of the 90,000 who set out, barely a few thousand survived. But the Long March made Mao the undisputed leader of the party. From caves in the town of Yan'an, he forged a hardened movement, promising land to the peasants and dignity to a broken nation. His legend was born. Then Japan invaded, and China was engulfed in a savage war that killed millions. While Chiang's nationalists bled against the Japanese, Mao's communists grew stronger in the countryside, patient, disciplined, and waiting. When the war ended, the two sides turned on each other. In a massive civil war, Mao's peasant armies swept the nationalists off the mainland, driving Chiang and his government into exile on the island of Taiwan. On October 1, 1949, Mao stood atop the gate of Tiananmen and proclaimed the People's Republic of China. The Chinese people, he declared, had stood up. A century of humiliation was over. To many, it was a moment of pure hope. At first came real change. Landlords' estates were broken up and given to the peasants. Women gained new rights. Literacy spread and life expectancy began to climb. For a people used to famine and warlords, it felt like a new dawn. But the new dawn had a dark edge. In the land reform, landlords were dragged before furious crowds and executed by the hundreds of thousands. From the very start, Mao's China was built on both hope and blood. In 1957, Mao invited people to freely criticize the party. "Let 100 flowers bloom," he said. When the criticism poured in, he turned on the critics. 500,000 intellectuals were branded enemies and destroyed. It was a trap. Then in 1958 came his greatest gamble, the Great Leap Forward. Mao promised to overtake the West in a few short years. Peasants were herded into giant communes and ordered to make steel in backyard furnaces. It was a delusion. The backyard steel was useless. Farmers pulled from the fields let the harvest rot. Terrified local officials reported fake, impossible harvests, and the state seized grain that did not exist, leaving the villages with nothing. What followed was the greatest famine in recorded history. Between 1959 and 61, an estimated 30 to 45 million people starved to death. In some villages, the desperate resorted to eating bark, clay, and even the dead. The scale of death was staggering, and it was hidden from the world. Quietly, other leaders pushed Mao aside to repair the ruined economy. Humiliated and sidelined, the aging chairman began to plot his return, and his revenge would consume the nation. In 1966, Mao unleashed the Cultural Revolution. He called on the young to rise up and purge the country of old ideas and hidden enemies. Millions of students formed the Red Guards, waving his little red book like scripture. The country descended into madness. Teachers, doctors, and officials were dragged into struggle sessions, beaten, humiliated, and killed by their own students. Ancient temples and priceless art were smashed. Neighbor denounced neighbor. Families tore themselves apart. For a decade, China turned on itself. Perhaps 1.5 million people were killed, and tens of millions more were persecuted, imprisoned, or driven from their homes. An entire generation lost its education and its innocence. Through it all, the cult of Mao reached godlike heights. His portrait hung in every home. His words were law. He had shattered the country, yet the country was taught to love him for it, with a devotion that bordered on worship. In his final years, the ailing chairman stunned the world by welcoming the American president, Richard Nixon, to Beijing. The two great enemies shook hands, and the map of the Cold War quietly shifted forever. But his body was failing. On September 9, 1976, Mao Zedong died. A stunned nation wept for the only leader most had ever known. Soon after, the Cultural Revolution was declared a catastrophe and quietly buried. The China Mao left behind was poor and traumatized, yet he had also unified it, ended foreign domination, and laid the foundations of the state that would soon rise to challenge the world. His successors kept his face, but abandoned his economics. The reckoning is almost beyond comprehension. Through famine and terror, the policies of Mao Zedong are linked to the deaths of tens of millions of people, more than any other leader in the 20th century. And still, his portrait hangs over Tiananmen Square to this day. Founder of modern China, or author of its greatest tragedies, perhaps like the nation he made, Mao Zedong was both at once. He lifted a fallen empire off its knees, and then crushed it under the weight of his own dreams. How history remembers Mao Zedong may say as much about us as it does about him. The verdict is yours.